My name is Claire Donovan. I'm 37 years old, and the night my marriage finally cracked open did not begin with screaming. It began with my husband telling a table full of our friends that he needed a new wife because this one was broken. If that sounds cruel when you hear it plainly, that is because it was. But to understand why I stood up, ended my marriage in a single sentence, and walked out without ever looking back, you have to understand how many small humiliations came before the one that finally split everything open. I'm a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant in Ohio. I've been there for 12 years. I started right out of college when the economy was a mess, and I was lucky to get anything steady. I stayed because I was good at it, the work challenged me, and the company treated me fairly. It's not glamorous work. Nobody hears production systems and imagines champagne or excitement, but it's solid. It matters. I design manufacturing lines, troubleshoot equipment failures, improve efficiency, solve the kind of problems that make other people stare at a jammed machine and swear, while I stand there quietly and start tracing the failure point. That tendency followed me into every other part of my life. I plan ahead. I always have. Even as a kid, I was the one organizing neighborhood games, making sure everyone knew where to be, what time to show up, and who was bringing what. My friends used to joke that I probably had retirement mapped out before I could rent a car. They were not wrong. I opened a 401k at 23, bought my house at 29, paid off my truck by 32. I liked knowing where I stood. I liked building something instead of gambling on chaos and hoping it turned into a personality. My ex-husband, Nathan, eventually turned that into a flaw. Said I was too predictable, too careful, too settled. Like stability was some kind of character defect. The house matters, so let me explain that part clearly. I bought it 6 years before the divorce. 2 full years before I ever met Nathan. 3 bedrooms in a decent neighborhood. Nothing flashy, but solid bones. Good foundation, clean inspection, reasonable taxes. I did what I do with everything important. I researched it thoroughly, compared sale prices, looked at structural reports, walked through every inch of that place before I signed anything. Mortgage in my name only. Deed in my name only. Every payment from my account only. By the time Nathan moved in after the wedding, I had already paid down almost a third of it. I had built a life before he ever stepped into it. That mattered later. Nathan and I met about 7 years ago at a charity event. He was working the registration table as a volunteer. My company had sponsored the event, and I was there because someone had to represent us. The first thing I noticed about him was his laugh. It carried. Warm, confident, easy. He had the kind of energy people turn toward without realizing they were doing it. He was good with strangers, good in rooms, good at making people feel like they were inside a story he was telling. At the time, I thought we balanced each other. He brought spontaneity to my structured life. I brought steadiness to his chaos. Classic opposites attract. The kind of dynamic people romanticize because it looks beautiful at the beginning, when all the parts that will eventually destroy you still feel charming. We dated for 2 years before getting married. The wedding was nice. Nothing absurd. Around 80 people. Backyard reception at his parents' place. Catered barbecue from a local place everybody loved. His father liked that I had a stable career and knew how to fix things. His mother said I was the kind of woman families prayed their sons would marry. At the time, I believed that meant I was entering a family that valued me. Nathan moved into my house after the wedding and started redecorating almost immediately. I didn't mind. His taste was better than mine in some areas, and the place did feel warmer afterward. He painted the living room a soft gray that actually worked, replaced the old couch pillows I'd had since my late 20s, hung framed prints on walls I had ignored for years. He had a way of softening spaces, making them feel less functional and more lived in. For a while, I loved that. It made the house feel less like a machine I maintained and more like a home. The first few years were good. Actually good. Friday date nights, weekend trips, dinner parties with friends. The sort of marriage that looks easy from the outside because both people still believe they are being seen clearly. Nathan worked part-time at a boutique downtown selling expensive clothes to women who never looked at price tags. He said full-time work drained him. Said retail was easier to survive in smaller doses. Since I made enough to cover everything, he asked why he should grind himself into the ground just to prove a point. At the time, I didn't push back. I covered the mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, car expenses, health coverage. Everything that made a life run. His paycheck became his spending money. Clothes, hair appointments, lunches with friends, random purchases that showed up in glossy bags by the front door. I told myself that partnership was flexible, that not everything needed to be measured if the relationship itself was healthy. That was the lie I lived inside for longer than I should have, because the warning signs were there early. Small comments, little cuts disguised as humor. Nathan liked to joke that I was like a golden retriever in a blazer, reliable, eager to please, always showing up. People laughed because he said it with a smile and leaned into me afterward like affection could erase contempt. He called me predictable as if it were a punchline. Told people I was sweet in the way people describe a dependable appliance they are mildly embarrassed to own. At least Claire is reliable, he'd say when I remembered anniversaries or booked thoughtful weekends away. It sounded like praise until you listened closely. At least, reliable. Not passionate. Not exciting. Not enough. Each comment was small enough to survive on its own. That was the problem. One drop of water doesn't look dangerous, but enough of them can rot a ceiling from the inside. His friends didn't help. He had this circle, mostly men, a few women from work and social stuff, who seemed to live on complaints about their partners. Every brunch, every dinner, every gathering somehow turned into a competition over who was most disappointed in the person they had chosen. Nathan would come home and compare me to them. At least I wasn't as inattentive as someone else's wife. At least I kept the house running. At least I wasn't dramatic. Praise that always landed like criticism. The real slide started about 18 months before everything ended. Nathan joined a book club through a coworker, a monthly gathering that, from what I could tell, involved expensive wine, half-read novels, and a lot of performative opinions. I had nothing against it. People need hobbies. People need lives outside marriage. But after a few months, he started coming home with new dissatisfaction in his mouth, like he had picked it up from the room and brought it back with him. Suddenly, our life wasn't exciting enough. Our house was too suburban. My job was too safe, too boring, too cautious. He started comparing me to other husbands' wives in reverse, except the point was always that I lacked some quality another woman supposedly had. One man's wife had surprised him with a spontaneous trip. Another had convinced her husband to quit his job and open a food truck. Another had real passion, whatever that meant, in the flavor of the week language Nathan had started using. I remember standing in the kitchen one night while he leaned against the counter drinking one of those imported sparkling waters he liked, saying, "Do you ever think maybe you've built a life so stable there's no oxygen left in it?" I laughed the first time. I thought he was being dramatic. He wasn't. The comments kept coming. Then he started making them in front of other people. At dinner parties, he'd toss out little lines about how I was basically an ATM with a calendar, or how marrying me was like marrying a project manager who occasionally paid for nice steak. His friends would laugh awkwardly. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked entertained. I started watching faces more than listening to words, because sometimes other people's discomfort tells you more clearly how bad something is than your own denial does. I brought it up in private more than once, asked him why he needed to diminish me in front of others. His response never changed. I was too sensitive. It was just a joke. Everybody teased their spouse. Why was I acting so fragile? So I adapted. I told myself all marriages go through strange seasons. I kept planning thoughtful evenings, kept remembering important dates, kept paying every bill and fixing whatever broke and carrying the invisible weight that makes daily life function. I kept thinking if I loved him steadily enough, he would stop treating steadiness like something humiliating. He didn't. Then came the dinner. We had a monthly tradition with 3 other couples we'd known for years. Good people, the kind of friends who had seen us enough times to know our rhythms. Daniel and Melissa, old friends from college days. Marcus and Brittany, people we met through a golf league fundraiser. Evan and Sophie, newer neighbors, who had slid naturally into the group. We rotated houses or picked a restaurant and caught up on life. That night we were at an Italian place we'd gone to for years. Low lighting. Brick walls. The kind of place where the bread is always hot and the waitstaff know how to leave you alone just enough. Nathan had had a bad week at the boutique. Some customer had thrown a fit. His manager had taken the customer's side. I could feel it from the second we sat down. He was restless, sharp-edged, looking for somewhere to place his frustration. He chose me. The conversation started normally. Vacation plans, job complaints, kids, spring travel. Someone asked about a production line I was designing at work, one that was projected to increase output by around 15%. I was proud of that project. I had spent months on it, reworking layouts, troubleshooting bottlenecks, finding ways to improve efficiency without causing downtime. For once, I let myself talk about it a little. I got halfway through the explanation before Nathan cut me off. "Oh my God," he said, loud enough for the whole table to turn. "I need a new husband." He smiled as if he had said something playful. Then he lifted his glass and added, "This one's broken." Silence. Heavy, instant, total. The kind of silence that arrives so fast it almost has weight. I heard the clink of ice in someone's water. He kept going. "Seriously, though," he said, laughing now. "She's useless outside of work. She just works, sleeps, and schedules things. It's like being married to a very expensive piece of furniture that occasionally takes out the garbage." 8 people stared at me. I could feel heat rise into my face, not because I was ashamed of myself, but because public humiliation has a way of making your skin feel like it no longer belongs to you. Daniel looked down at his plate. Marcus suddenly found his glass fascinating. The women exchanged that particular look people give when a line has been crossed so hard it leaves a mark on the room. And Nathan just sat there smiling, waiting for me to laugh, waiting for me to rescue him from what he had just revealed about himself. Something in me went still. Not shattered, not inflamed, still. For 18 months I had been translating cruelty into stress, contempt into humor, repeated disrespect into temporary frustration. Sitting there in that restaurant, hearing my husband call me broken in front of people who knew us, something finally became simple. He meant it. Maybe not every exact word in every exact moment, but the sentiment, yes, he meant that. And he would keep meaning it for as long as I stayed and let him. I picked up my napkin, folded it once, set it neatly beside my plate. Then I stood. Nobody moved. Nathan blinked up at me, confused already because I wasn't playing the role he expected. I looked him straight in the eye and said very calmly, "You're single now. Problem solved." Then I turned and walked away. I heard him behind me almost immediately. "Wait, what?" Then louder, with that laugh still clinging to his voice because he hadn't caught up yet. "Claire, come on, babe, seriously, it was a joke." I kept walking, past the other tables, past the hostess stand, past the warm restaurant air and out into the parking lot where the cold hit my face and made everything sharper. My phone started buzzing before I even reached my truck. I ignored it, got in, started the engine, and drove home. The drive took about 15 minutes, and I spent every one of them in a kind of frozen clarity I had not felt in years. No screaming, no tears, no speech rehearsed for later, just a clean, hard understanding of what came next. When a machine fails, there is a point where you stop hoping it will correct itself. You isolate the problem. You shut it down before it causes more damage. That was how it felt. I walked into my house, went straight to the bedroom, and started packing. Laptop, a week's worth of clothes, passport, birth certificate, social security card, the house deed, recent pay stubs, tax returns. Everything I might need if this became legal, which by then I knew it would. My phone kept lighting up on the bedspread. Nathan's name over and over, then his mother, then his sister, then friends. The preview banners told the emotional story without me opening a single message. "Where are you? This is insane. You're overreacting. Please come back. Call me right now." I turned the phone off. Silence rushed in so fast it almost made me dizzy. 20 minutes later, I checked into a hotel across town. Nothing fancy. Clean sheets, neutral walls, a small desk by the window. The kind of room people use when they need somewhere temporary enough not to ask questions. I turned my phone back on long enough to send one text to a friend of mine from the golf league, a lawyer named Brandon Hale. "Need to talk tomorrow. Divorce. I'll explain in the morning." Then I turned it off again. And for the first time in months, maybe longer, I slept. Not fitfully, not angrily, not in fragments between dread and rehearsed forgiveness. 8 full hours. The kind of sleep that only comes when your body realizes the thing hurting you is no longer in the room. Morning came with clarity instead of regret. That was the first thing that surprised me. I woke once around 3 in the morning, stared at the unfamiliar hotel ceiling, remembered exactly where I was and why, and felt a brief, hollow ache move through my chest. Not doubt, not even grief in the way I expected it. More like the ghost of grief, the shape of a life I had been trying to hold together long after it had stopped holding me. Then I rolled over and went back to sleep. When I woke for real, sunlight was pushing through the cheap beige curtains, and my phone was vibrating across the bedside table like something frantic and alive. I let it buzz for a while before I picked it up. 112 notifications. Missed calls from Nathan. Voicemails from Nathan. Texts from Nathan. Calls from his mother, his sister, and at least 3 of his friends. A message from Melissa asking if I was okay. A message from Daniel saying, "Call if you need anything." Everything else was noise. I scrolled just far enough to see the emotional trajectory in Nathan's messages. First confusion. "What are you doing?" Then indignation. "You embarrassed me." Then bargaining. "Come back and we'll talk." Then accusation. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Then panic. "Please don't do this." Then the oldest trick in the book. "You know I love you." I stared at that last one for a few seconds. Love is a strange word when it comes from someone who has spent months reducing you in public and then acts shocked when you finally believe them. I deleted the entire thread without opening anything fully. Then I blocked his number. I blocked his mother's, his sister's, 2 of his friends. One by one, I cut the lines. Not dramatically, not angrily, methodically. The same way I would isolate a faulty system so it stopped contaminating everything attached to it. Then I called Brandon. He answered on the second ring. "That was fast," he said. "You were expecting me." After that text? Yeah. A beat of silence. Then, more seriously, what happened? I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, looked down at the carpet, and told him the truth in the cleanest possible version. My husband has been publicly humiliating me for months. Last night, in front of 8 people, he said he needed a new husband because this one was broken. Brandon was quiet for a second. Then, "And you're done?" "Yes." "You sure?" I didn't even have to think about it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He exhaled slowly. All right, then let's talk logistics. There is something almost comforting about legal conversations when your personal life is collapsing. Feelings blur. Facts do not. Brandon asked questions and I answered them. House? Mine before the marriage. Deed and mortgage only in my name. Joint accounts? None. Nathan insisted from the beginning that he wanted financial independence. At the time, I thought it was maturity. In hindsight, it mostly meant he wanted the freedom of separation without the burden of contribution. Kids? No. Vehicles? My truck in my name, his car in his. Retirement accounts? Mine predated the marriage, and I had kept contributing through payroll. Any shared debt? No. He made a low sound in his throat, the lawyer equivalent of somebody seeing a clean set of numbers on a screen. Claire, I'm not saying divorce is ever simple, but structurally, this is cleaner than most. That didn't make me happy. It made me colder. Because hearing how little was truly shared made something else painfully clear. For all the years Nathan talked about marriage, about partnership, about our life together, he had built himself into my world more than he had built a world with me. Brandon continued, I can start paperwork right away, a few days at most. From this point forward, document everything, every call, every text, every voicemail, every interaction, dates, times, screenshots, notes. If he or his family contact you, save it. Don't argue, don't explain. Let the record speak. I can do that. I know you can. He paused again, then asked, Do you have somewhere stable to stay besides the hotel? Not yet. Find something temporary today. Keep your routine if you can. Go to work, eat, sleep. Don't let this turn into chaos. That almost made me laugh. Nothing I hate more than chaos. Good, he said, use that. We spoke for nearly an hour. By the time I hung up, my next steps were laid out as neatly as a project plan. Temporary housing. Change passwords. Save every communication. Do not meet Nathan alone. Do not go back to the house without legal guidance if anything feels volatile. Let Brandon file. Let the system work. I showered, got dressed, and went into the day with a calm that would have looked almost unnatural to anyone who didn't know how long this had been building. I found a corporate apartment that afternoon. Month-to-month lease. Furnished. Quiet complex about 10 minutes from the plant. Neutral furniture, functional kitchen, a little desk in the corner, no emotional history attached to any of it. Exactly what I needed. I signed the lease, dropped my bag inside, opened my laptop on the desk, and sat in the silence for a minute. It felt strange. 5 years of marriage, and suddenly all my life fit into one room. But it also felt lighter than it should have. No tension in the walls. No waiting for the next cutting remark disguised as wit. No sense that I needed to monitor the emotional weather in my own home. Just stillness. Brandon had the divorce papers ready in 3 days. He asked if I wanted Nathan served at home or at work. I thought about it for less than 10 seconds. At work. There was a pause on the line. Not the gentle option. He stopped getting the gentle option when he humiliated me in public and then spent the night trying to gaslight me into believing I owed him another conversation. Fair enough. Nathan was served at the boutique sometime around noon. I wasn't there, but I heard about it in pieces. Apparently, the process server walked in while he was helping a customer choose between 2 jackets. Nathan assumed it was a delivery. Then he saw the envelope, heard his full legal name, and everything shifted. Someone later told Melissa that he started crying almost immediately, that he kept saying, "She can't be serious," as if seriousness were the one thing he had never allowed me to possess. His manager sent him home early. Part of me felt something when I heard that. Not pity. Not satisfaction either. Just recognition. Consequences always sound cruelest to the people meeting them for the first time. My phone started blowing up again that afternoon, but now the calls came from unfamiliar numbers. Nathan had clearly mobilized his entire support network. The first call I answered was from his sister, Olivia. Her voice came sharp and breathless through the line, like she had been waiting all day to perform outrage. "What is wrong with you?" "Hello to you too. Do you know how devastated he is? He's been crying for 3 days. He should have thought about that before humiliating me in front of our friends." "It was a joke," she snapped. "He was upset. He had a bad week. You know how he gets." I leaned back in the chair at the desk and looked out at the apartment parking lot. "Yes," I said. "I do know how he gets. That's exactly why I'm divorcing him." "You are seriously throwing away your marriage over one comment?" "No, I'm ending my marriage over a pattern of disrespect that your brother assumed I'd tolerate forever." She let out a bitter laugh. "You've always thought you were better than him." That one landed differently. Not because it was true. Because I realized Nathan had likely been telling people his own version of our marriage for a long time. A version where my steadiness was superiority. My competence was coldness. My refusal to collapse was arrogance. "No," I said quietly. "I just finally stopped believing I deserved to be treated badly." She started talking over me, louder now, words blurring into accusation. I ended the call. Blocked her number. Logged the date and time. Save the voicemail she left 2 minutes later calling me heartless. An hour after that, Nathan's mother called. I almost didn't answer, but Brandon had said documentation mattered, and sometimes the cleanest evidence comes from letting people reveal themselves. Her voice carried that polished disappointment some women seem to sharpen over decades. "Claire," she said, as though we were beginning a civilized conversation, "you need to fix this." I stared at the legal pad beside my laptop where I had started writing down contact attempts. "Fix what?" "This whole mess. Nathan is under an unbelievable amount of stress. He made one foolish comment, and now you're destroying your marriage over pride." I almost smiled at that, because that is how people like her reframe cruelty. The wound becomes your ego. The injury becomes your reaction to it. "He didn't make one foolish comment," I said. "He's been publicly undermining me for months." "Oh, please. Men tease, women tease. Marriage is hard. You don't run every time things get uncomfortable." "He didn't just tease me. He called me broken in front of our friends." She sighed like I was exhausting. "You know he didn't mean it that way. He meant it enough to say it." Another sigh. "Claire, you're being childish." That did it. I sat forward. "And you raised a son who thinks humiliating his spouse is entertainment. Looks like we both have disappointments." Silence. Then a cold inhale. "You will regret speaking to me that way." "No," I said. "I won't." I hung up. Blocked her. Logged it. Saved the voicemail she sent after from another number. The one where she said marriage required forgiveness and accused me of abandoning a good man in his time of need. That phrase stayed with me for hours. A good man. It's remarkable how long some people can wear that label while behaving nothing like it. Nathan's friends tried next. Texts, mostly. Long emotional paragraphs from people I barely knew, telling me he was crushed, that he had been under pressure, that real love meant working through difficult moments. One woman wrote that I was weaponizing competence because I had more financial security than he did. I read that one twice. Then I laughed out loud for the first time since the dinner. Weaponizing competence. As if paying the mortgage, maintaining the house, and showing up consistently for years were somehow acts of aggression. I blocked them all. No speeches. No corrections. No invitations into my head. By the end of the week, the noise had thinned. People tend to stop knocking when they realize no one is opening the door. Work, thankfully, remained work. That mattered more than I can explain. At the plant, machines still jammed for ordinary reasons. Systems still needed calibration. A conveyor issue online. 3 still mattered because it was line 3, not because my life was disintegrating. There was relief in that. Problems at work were solvable in direct proportion. You found the failure point. You corrected it. You moved forward. People at the plant knew something was off, but I kept it contained. My boss asked once if I needed a few days. I told him no. He looked at me carefully and said, "All right, but if that changes, let me know." I appreciated that he didn't pry. Not everyone needs the whole story to respect your boundaries. 3 days after the papers were served, Nathan finally tried a different angle. He emailed me. Subject line, "Please." I should not have opened it, but I did. The email was long in the way manipulative apologies often are. Heavy on emotion, light on accountability. He said he had been embarrassed. He said he lashed out because he felt disconnected from me. He said I had been distant for months. He said he was under stress. He said the dinner had been a joke that got out of hand. He said I was the love of his life. He said he couldn't believe I was doing this over one terrible moment. That phrase again. One moment. As though repetition disappears if you rename it. As though 18 months of erosion can be disguised as a single storm. Halfway down the message, he wrote, "You know how I joke. You know I never wanted to hurt you. I just miss us. I miss my husband." I stopped there. Not because that line broke me. Because it didn't. Because the word husband, used tenderly now, sounded less like love and more like ownership. Like a man standing in a doorway of a house he did not build, shocked to find the locks of entitlement finally changed against him. I forwarded the email to Brandon. Then I created a folder and started saving everything. By the end of the first week, my new life had a rhythm. Wake up. Go to work. Answer only what needed answering. Document everything else. Come home to the apartment. Heat something simple for dinner. Sit in the quiet. Sleep. The quiet was the hardest part at first. Then it became the best part. No one mocking me for talking about work. No one rolling his eyes when I planned ahead. No one making me feel vaguely ridiculous for being the person I had always been. Do you know what happens when contempt leaves a room? You can finally hear yourself think. A week into the separation, Brandon called with the first real complication. "Nathan hired a lawyer," he said. I was sitting at the apartment desk with a bowl of soup growing cold beside me. "On what grounds?" "He's contesting. Claims you abandoned the marriage over a harmless comment, and that given the length of the relationship, he deserves consideration." I actually smiled then, small and humorless. Consideration. Yeah. What does he think that means? That, Brandon said, dryly, is what we're going to make the court explain to him. He told me we needed witness statements from the dinner. Not because the divorce depended on a single public insult, but because the dinner was the clearest visible event in a longer pattern. If our friends had noticed it, if they had seen him do it before, if they were willing to put it in writing, that mattered. I hated asking. Not because I was ashamed, because I have never liked pulling other people into a mess, even when the mess was made in front of them. Still, I reached out. Melissa responded first. Immediately. Claire, yes. Absolutely. He's been speaking to you like that for months, and that night was horrible. I've been sick about it ever since. Daniel called me instead of texting. I'm glad you left, he said, without preamble. I blinked. He kept going. I wanted to say something that night, but I didn't know if stepping in would make it worse. I've watched him chip away at you for a while now. You didn't deserve any of it. Something in my chest tightened unexpectedly. Not because I needed validation. Because there is a specific ache in learning that other people saw you being diminished while you were still trying to explain it away. Marcus and Brittany were the same. Supportive, angry on my behalf. Brittany said, I was furious the whole drive home. I told Marcus if anyone ever spoke to me the way Nathan spoke to you, I'd be gone before dessert. Evan, the quietest of the group, sent the longest reply. He said he had only known us for 2 years, but even he could tell Nathan treated me like an audience member in my own marriage, someone to perform frustration at rather than love. Sophie added her own note beneath his. You were always kind. He was always testing how much disrespect he could get away with. We'll write whatever you need. I forwarded every message to Brandon. For the first time since leaving, I felt something close to steadiness returning under my feet. Not joy, not yet, but ground. Proof that I had not imagined it. Proof that what happened at that table was not an isolated mistake, but the loudest version of something quieter and uglier that had been growing for a long time. That night, after I sent the last witness statement, I stood at the apartment window, looking out over the dim parking lot, and thought about the version of myself from 6 months earlier. The woman who still believed patience could fix contempt. The woman who kept translating insult into stress and disrespect into a rough patch. I didn't hate her. I understood her. Hope makes fools of intelligent people all the time, especially when it dresses itself up as loyalty. My phone buzzed once on the desk behind me. Unknown number. I let it ring through. Then another message came in. I'm outside. Please just talk to me. I turned slowly toward the screen. For the first time all week, something cold moved through me. Not fear. Calculation. Because if Nathan had found the apartment already, then whatever came next was not going to stay contained to pleading and guilt. And deep down, I knew something else too. Men like Nathan rarely panic gracefully when they realize the person they mocked was the one holding the whole structure up. Stop. Continue. Part 3. I did not answer the message. I didn't go outside. I didn't pull back the curtain and look for his car like some part of me still owed him visual confirmation that I was there. I called Brandon. He picked up immediately. He found the apartment. Stay inside, he said. Do not go down. Do not engage. If he refuses to leave, call the police. Then write down the time he arrived, the time he texted, and anything else that happens. I glanced through the blinds without exposing myself. Nathan's car was parked crooked under one of the security lights, like he had pulled in too fast. I could see him pacing near the entrance with his hands shoved through his hair, shoulders tight, head bent forward. Even from that distance, his body looked different, less graceful, less controlled, like panic had finally stripped off the social polish he wore so easily in public. Why is he here? Brandon asked. Because the witnesses supported me. Or because the lawyer told him this is real, or because he finally understands I'm not coming back. All 3, Brandon said. Call the police if he doesn't leave within 10 minutes. I waited 7. At minute 8, Nathan called from another unknown number. At minute 9, he started texting. Please. I know you're in there. We need to talk face to face. You can't do this through lawyers. Claire, come on. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to Brandon. At minute 10, I called the non-emergency line and reported an unwanted person outside my temporary residence during a pending divorce. I kept my voice calm, gave the address, explained that I did not want contact and had documentation of him being told not to approach me. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. Nathan tried to look reasonable when they spoke to him. I could tell that much even from the window. Hands open, shoulders lowered. The posture of a man trying to appear wounded instead of intrusive. One officer spoke for a while. Nathan gestured toward the building once, then toward his chest, then down at his phone as if emotion itself should count as legal access. It didn't. He left. The officer buzzed my unit afterward just to confirm I was safe. I thanked him, wrote down both badge numbers, and saved that too. That was the thing about the next phase of the divorce. Everything became evidence. Every unwanted visit. Every voicemail. Every lie wrapped in sentiment. Nathan seemed to think that if he made enough noise, if he flooded the system with enough emotion, someone would eventually decide I owed him a softer ending. Instead, he kept giving me proof. A few days after the apartment incident, my credit card got declined at a gas station. That might not sound dramatic, but there is something uniquely humiliating about standing at a pump in work boots and a winter jacket, watching the screen reject a card you know should work. I tried again. Same result. Went inside. Same result. The cashier gave me that tight, sympathetic smile people use when they don't want to embarrass you further. I pulled up my banking app. Frozen. Every account was locked pending fraud review. I felt a very specific kind of rage then. Not explosive. Not cinematic. Focused. The kind of anger that narrows your vision and sharpens your breathing. I called the bank from the parking lot. After enough transfers to make me hate every recorded voice in the building, I finally got a manager who explained what had happened. Your husband filed a fraud alert, she said. He reported erratic purchases and expressed concern about your mental state. I laughed once. A flat, disbelieving sound that didn't resemble amusement. He's not authorized on my accounts. I understand. But he provided your social security number, account details, and enough identifying information to sound credible under fraud protocol. We had to freeze temporarily until verification. I drove straight to the bank. 3 hours. That's how long it took to untangle it. ID checks, forms, manager meetings, proof of residence at the apartment, copy of the divorce filing, statements showing sole ownership. By the end of it, I had spoken to 3 different people, signed paperwork declaring Nathan had absolutely no authority over any of my financial instruments, and added additional security measures that made it nearly impossible for anyone to touch the accounts without my physical presence and multiple forms of identification. The branch manager, a woman maybe in her 50s with tired eyes and immaculate nails, slid her card across the desk and said, "This is harassment. I'm flagging your profile for heightened verification and noting explicitly that your spouse has no access. I'm sorry you're dealing with this." I took her card, documented the time, wrote down exactly what she said as soon as I got back to my truck. Then I sent the whole summary to Brandon. He called 10 minutes later. "This is good for your case. It cost me half a day and my patience." I know, but judges care about patterns, and your husband is building one. That word stayed with me. Building. Because that was what Nathan was doing without realizing it. Brick by brick, stunt by stunt, he was constructing the exact version of himself I would need the court to see. A week later, I went back to the house. Not alone. Brandon advised against that. He had one of his paralegals coordinate with me first, and I went in broad daylight with a printed copy of the deed, my ID, and a plan to collect the rest of my immediate belongings. Seasonal clothes, a few personal items, some tools from the garage, books, sentimental things that belonged to my life before Nathan. I pulled into the driveway and just sat there for a moment. It was strange seeing my own house and feeling like I needed permission to approach it. The paint I had chosen years ago still held the same warm undertone in the afternoon light. The porch steps still had the crack I kept meaning to repair. The oak tree in the front yard was still bare from winter. Nothing looked different. But the feeling was different, like standing outside a place where someone had rewritten the atmosphere without asking you. I walked up to the front door, put my key in the lock, and it stopped halfway. I tried again. Nothing. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds before the reality settled in. He had changed the locks. On my house. The house I bought before I knew him. The house whose mortgage had never known his name. Something cold and almost calm moved through me. I called Brandon from the porch. He changed the locks. There was silence on the line. Then, very quietly, "Are you sure?" I held up the useless key in front of the door, like he could somehow see it through the phone. "Yes." Another beat. Then I heard him exhale. "Perfect." That is not the word I would use. "It is if you're me," he said. "Don't leave. I'm contacting local law enforcement now. You have the deed copy?" "In my bag." "Good, stay put." The officers arrived about 40 minutes later. 2 of them. One younger, all procedural energy. One older, with the weary expression of someone who had seen every species of domestic absurdity and no longer found any of it surprising. They knocked. Nathan opened the door. For a moment, just one moment, his face looked almost hopeful. Then he saw me standing behind the officers, and the hope vanished so fast it was almost ugly. He looked terrible. Sweatpants, messy hair, eyes swollen from crying or not sleeping or both. He had always cared about appearances. Seeing him like that should have stirred something softer in me. It didn't. The older officer introduced himself, then got straight to the point. "Sir, this property is solely owned by Ms. Donovan. We've reviewed documentation. You cannot deny her access." Nathan's face changed immediately. "Excuse me, we're married. I live here." "Do you own the house?" the officer asked. Nathan hesitated. "No, but..." "Is your name on the deed or mortgage?" "No, but I've lived here for 5 years. That has to count for something." The officer didn't even blink. "It counts for residence, not ownership. You cannot change the locks and deny the owner entry." Nathan looked at me then. Not the officers. Me. And I saw it in his face before he said it. That particular combination of shock and resentment people wear when consequences arrive in the shape of rules they assumed would never be applied to them. "You called the cops on me?" he asked. "No," I said. "I called the law." The younger officer had to look away for a second, probably to avoid smiling. Nathan stepped back eventually, but not before throwing one last protest into the air. She abandoned the marriage. The older officer replied without interest. That doesn't make this your house. I walked inside. My house smelled wrong. Not dirty. Not ruined. Just wrong. Like stale cologne and unwashed dishes and the heavy, closed-up air of a place where someone has been spiraling in private. The living room looked mostly the same at first glance. The framed prints Nathan had chosen were still up. The decorative bowls on the side table were still where he liked them. But then I looked deeper. The throw blanket from the couch was gone. One lamp was crooked. Mail was piled unevenly on the console by the door. It looked less like a home than a set someone had stopped maintaining. The garage door was open. The older officer gestured for me to look there first. That was where Nathan had put my things. In garbage bags. Black contractor bags tied at the top and stacked against the wall beside the lawn tools. My winter coats. My books. A box of framed photos from before I met him. My grandfather's watch in a zippered pouch tossed on top of one bag like an afterthought. Hand tools my father had given me. Everything reduced to plastic bundles like I had already been cleared out for disposal. I stood there for a moment just looking at it. Then I turned and asked, very evenly, "Really?" Nathan hovered in the doorway between the kitchen and garage, arms crossed too tightly. "You left. That was your solution?" I asked. "Bag up my life like trash?" He gave a bitter laugh. "What was I supposed to do, Claire? Build a shrine? You walked out on me over one joke." One joke. Even now, even standing in my own garage with police officers looking at the evidence of his behavior, he still needed the lie more than the truth. The older officer began taking photos. The younger one asked me to identify specific personal property and note any visible damage. Nathan tried the wounded voice next. I said I was sorry. "No," I said without looking at him. "You said it was a joke. You said I was overreacting. Those are not the same thing. I'm saying it now." I zipped open one of the bags and found a stack of books with bent covers. Too late. He stepped closer, not threateningly, desperately. That's what made it more pathetic. "Please just talk to me. No lawyers. No police. Just talk to me." I straightened up and faced him then. Something about the way he said talk made me realize what he really wanted. Not understanding. Not repair. Access. He wanted access to the version of me that still believed conversation could save him from the consequences of his own behavior. That version was gone. "There is nothing left to discuss that isn't already in writing," I said. His face hardened. The vulnerability vanished so quickly it was almost impressive. And underneath it, there he was. The real thing. Small. Angry. Entitled. "Unbelievable," he said, "after everything I gave this marriage." The younger officer actually snorted under his breath at that. I didn't bother responding. We documented everything. The change locks. The garbage bags. The fact that my property had been removed from the bedroom and stuffed into the garage. The officers wrote down Nathan's statements. Helped me carry what I could fit into my truck. Told me how to get a copy of the incident report. As I was loading the last bag, Nathan tried once more. This time with tears. Actual tears. Running down his face. Voice shaking. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm really sorry. I messed up. I know I did. Please don't do this." I looked at him across the driveway. For a second, I thought about all the times I had swallowed smaller wounds because he looked hurt when confronted. All the times I had mistaken his discomfort for remorse. Then I said the only honest thing left. "You're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry it worked." I got into my truck. The older officer stopped me before I pulled away. He rested one arm on the window frame and said, low enough that Nathan couldn't hear, "Good for you." I glanced up. He shrugged one shoulder. "Too many people stay in messes like this because they think they're supposed to. Take care of yourself." I nodded once. Then I drove away. Brandon was delighted when I sent him the photos and police report. That word again. Delighted. In any other context, it would have sounded monstrous. In divorce law, it meant the facts were finally speaking plainly. "She is destroying his own case," Brandon said over the phone. "He," I corrected automatically. "Right. He is destroying his own case. Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Document every stunt. No emotion, no side battles, just evidence." Nathan, unfortunately, was not finished. The next week, my gym membership got canceled. I found out at 6:30 in the morning when my access card stopped working, and the girl at the desk politely informed me my husband had called and said I wanted to terminate my membership. The same afternoon, my auto insurance company contacted me because someone had attempted to cancel my policy. Nathan had again impersonated me. He knew enough personal details to sound plausible. He knew which buttons to push in systems built to trust familiarity. So I locked down everything. Every password changed to randomized strings stored in an encrypted app. 2-factor authentication on every account that offered it. Fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus. Security questions changed to answers Nathan had never heard. Memberships, subscriptions, utilities, service providers, insurance, banking, everything got additional verification. It was exhausting, humiliating in places, inconvenient beyond belief. But with every call, every correction, every note entered into every customer file, another record was created, another timestamp, another witness, another institution that could later verify that my husband, who claimed I had overreacted to one joke, had been systematically attempting to disrupt my life because I refused to keep absorbing his contempt. About 2 months into the separation, Brandon called with the next major step. We're filing for exclusive possession of the house. I was sitting at my desk at work, staring at a system diagram while he spoke through my headset. Based on the lock change? The lock change, the impersonation attempts, the harassment pattern, the interference with property and accounts. Judges don't love people who behave like this during separation. Do judges love anything? Coffee, probably, maybe clean paperwork. But they especially love when one side hands them a documented pattern of instability. I leaned back in my chair and looked through the glass wall of the office at the plant floor beyond it. Forklifts moving, conveyor lines running, predictable motion, useful motion. What happens if he fights it? He will. You sound confident. Claire, men like Nathan always think charm outranks evidence until they are sitting in a courtroom watching paper beat personality. I almost smiled. Then he added, one more thing. Get ready. Once he realizes the house is slipping, he may escalate emotionally. Don't engage. He was right. That evening I got a 3-page email. Long paragraphs, rambling memories, screenshots of old photos attached like emotional exhibits. He wrote about our wedding, the Friday date nights, the living room color he chose, the first Christmas in the house. Then, halfway down the second page, the tone shifted. You are turning everyone against me. You're making me look abusive because you can't handle conflict. You always needed to be right. There it was again, the pivot. From apology to accusation, from pain to blame, from I miss you to this is your fault. I didn't respond. Forwarded it to Brandon, added it to the file. And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and legal paperwork and administrative mess of untangling myself from a man who mistook ridicule for intimacy, I felt something steadier than anger begin to form. Not revenge, not triumph, certainty. Because Nathan still thought this was a fight he could win emotionally. He thought volume might beat records. He thought tears might erase timestamps. He thought if he kept shifting between wounded and furious, eventually I would step back into the role he needed me to play. But the truth was simpler. He had already lost me at the restaurant. He just hadn't understood it yet. And very soon, a judge was going to explain it in language even he couldn't laugh off. Courtrooms are quieter than people expect. Not silent. There's always the soft shuffle of papers, the low murmur of voices, the occasional cough. But the kind of quiet that feels controlled, contained. Like everything inside it has rules, and those rules matter more than emotion. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Brandon, hands folded loosely in front of me, watching Nathan across the room. He looked different, not just tired, smaller. Like the version of himself that filled rooms so easily had been stripped down to something less convincing. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit right, the jacket pulling at the shoulders like he'd lost weight too quickly. His hair was combed, but not carefully. His eyes flicked around the courtroom in short, restless movements, like he was still trying to find an angle where this might somehow go his way. Beside him sat his lawyer. A man in a cheap gray suit with a polite, strained expression that suggested he had already realized this was not the case he thought he was taking. The judge entered. Everyone stood. She was older, composed, the kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice to command attention. Glasses on a chain. Expression neutral, but not soft. The kind of person who had seen enough versions of the same story to recognize patterns before people finished telling them. We sat. Nathan's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, he began, voice measured. While the property in question is technically in my client's wife's name, my client has resided there for 5 years and has contributed significantly to the household. How? The judge interrupted, without looking up from the file in front of her. The lawyer blinked. Your Honor? How did he contribute? She repeated, finally lifting her gaze. Was he on the mortgage? No. Did he make payments toward it? Well, not directly, but then in what way did he contribute? There was a pause. The lawyer shifted slightly. Through household labor and emotional support of the marriage. One of the judge's eyebrows lifted a fraction. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough. I felt it like a small shift in pressure. Not victory. Not yet, but direction. Brandon stood when it was our turn. He didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize. He simply laid everything out. The deed. Purchase date. 2 years before I met Nathan. Mortgage statements showing every payment from my account. Bank records covering utilities, insurance, groceries, every expense over 5 years. Employment records showing Nathan had worked part-time by choice the entire marriage. No career sacrifice. No financial contribution. Then he moved to the second part, the pattern. The judge flipped through the evidence as Brandon spoke. Witness statements. 6 people describing the dinner. Describing prior incidents. Describing a pattern of public humiliation and dismissive behavior. Police report documenting the changed locks. Photographs of my belongings in garbage bags in the garage. Bank documentation of the fraud alert filed under false pretenses. Statements from the gym and insurance company confirming impersonation attempts. Screenshots of emails. Voicemails. Texts. A timeline. Clean. Organized. Undeniable. This is not an isolated incident, Your Honor, Brandon said calmly. It is a consistent pattern of disrespect and post-separation harassment that directly supports our motion for exclusive possession. Nathan's lawyer shifted again. Your Honor, he said, these witnesses are clearly biased. They are friends of the petitioner. They are also friends of your client, the judge cut in, at least originally. Silence. They came forward voluntarily, Brandon added, without prompting, beyond a request for factual statements. The judge nodded once and went back to the documents. The room fell quiet again. Nathan shifted in his seat. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. I could feel the tension coming off him like heat. After a few minutes that felt longer than they were, the judge spoke. I am granting exclusive possession of the residence to the petitioner. Nathan's head snapped up. Effective immediately, she continued. The respondent will have 30 days to remove any remaining personal property. Any further attempts to interfere with accounts, property, or access will be considered contempt of court. Nathan's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something quickly. Nathan didn't respond. He was staring straight ahead. Not at me, not at the judge. At nothing. Like he was trying to process a reality he had never actually believed would happen. Then came the next part. Spousal support. This was where he thought he still had ground. His lawyer stood again. Your Honor, my client devoted 5 years to this marriage. He maintained the home, supported his wife's demanding career, and now faces the challenge of re-entering full-time employment after an extended period of part-time work. We are requesting reasonable support to allow him to transition. Brandon didn't wait long. Your Honor, he said, we have documentation of the respondent's employment history both before and during the marriage. He worked the same part-time position prior to the marriage that he maintained throughout. There was no career sacrifice. There was a choice. He handed over additional documents. Pay stubs, employment verification, 5 years of consistent part-time hours, no interruption, no shift, no evidence of any opportunity abandoned for the sake of the marriage. The judge reviewed them, slowly, carefully. Nathan's lawyer tried again. My client's standard of living was funded entirely by the petitioner, the judge said flatly. Silence again, the kind that settles heavier the second time. She set the papers down. I see no evidence of career sacrifice, she said. I see evidence of voluntary underemployment, supported by a spouse who assumed full financial responsibility. Nathan shifted beside his lawyer. Restless now. Agitated. This is not grounds for spousal support. The words landed clean. Final. Motion denied. That was when Nathan broke. Not quietly. Not in a controlled, emotional way. He snapped. This is unbelievable, he said, voice rising too fast, too loud. You're all against me. She's lying. She's made me look like some kind of... Sir, the judge said sharply, you will lower your voice. She left me over one joke, he continued, ignoring her. One joke, and now I lose everything? Everything. That word again. As if everything had ever belonged to him. As if the house, the stability, the financial structure, the life I had built before him, had somehow become his by proximity. Mr. Donovan, the judge said, voice cutting through his, if you do not compose yourself, I will hold you in contempt. He didn't. Not fully. He tried. You could see it, the effort to pull himself back into control. But it was too late. The emotion was already spilling over into something raw and uncontained. She manipulated this, he said, pointing in my direction without looking at me. She's always been like this. Cold. Calculated. She wanted out, and now she's making me pay for it. Security stepped closer. The judge didn't raise her voice again. She didn't need to. Remove him if he cannot conduct himself appropriately. Nathan's lawyer stood abruptly, hand on his arm, trying to steady him. Let's step outside, he murmured. Nathan shook him off. I'm not leaving. 2 security officers moved in. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't violent. But it was final. He was escorted out of the courtroom, still talking, still insisting, still trying to reshape the narrative, even as it collapsed around him. The door closed behind him. Silence returned. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked at Brandon. Proceed. Brandon didn't react, didn't look back at the door. He simply continued. Professional. Precise. Unmoved. That was the moment everything shifted completely. Not when the house was granted. Not when the support was denied. But when Nathan lost control in a room where control was the only currency that mattered. Because from that point on, he wasn't just the man contesting a divorce. He was the man who couldn't hold himself together when it counted. A week later, his lawyer withdrew from the case. No explanation beyond irreconcilable differences in representation, which was a polite way of saying he no longer wanted to stand between Nathan and the consequences of his own behavior. After that, Nathan represented himself. And that was when the filing started. Pages of rambling arguments, accusations without structure, emotional appeals disguised as legal reasoning, claims that I had emotionally abandoned him, that I had weaponized stability, that I owed him compensation for time invested. Every motion denied, every argument dismantled by the same facts. Ownership, documentation, pattern. The system didn't care how loudly he felt. It cared what could be proven. And Nathan had spent months proving the wrong things. The final hearing came 3 months after the dinner. 3 months from the moment he called me broken in front of 8 people to the moment he sat alone at the respondent's table with no lawyer, no support, and no version of the story left that anyone else was willing to carry for him. He looked older. That was the first thing I noticed. Not physically aged in any measurable way, but worn, like something inside him had been stretched too far and hadn't snapped back. The judge reviewed the final documents. Briefly, there wasn't much left to debate. I see no grounds for any of your claims, she said, looking directly at Nathan. The property in question belonged to your wife prior to the marriage. Financial records show she assumed full responsibility for all major expenses. Your conduct following separation has been documented as disruptive and inappropriate. Nathan didn't speak, didn't interrupt, didn't argue. He just sat there. I am granting the divorce, she continued. No spousal support will be awarded. Each party retains property in their own name. A pause. Then, almost as an afterthought, but not quite. You are fortunate, Mr. Donovan, that your wife has not pursued additional legal action regarding the harassment documented here. That landed harder than anything else. Because for the first time, someone in authority had said it plainly. Not conflict, not misunderstanding. Harassment. Nathan closed his eyes, just for a second, then opened them again. But something in his expression had shifted. Not acceptance, not growth. Just the hollow recognition of a reality he could no longer argue his way out of. The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. The strange thing about endings is that they rarely feel like endings when they happen. There's no music, no sense of finality in the air, just paperwork, signatures, people standing up, chairs scraping softly against the floor, and a door opening into a hallway that looks exactly like it did before your life changed. I walked out of the courthouse alone. Not dramatically, not with any kind of triumphant feeling. Just steady, like something that had been misaligned for a long time had finally clicked back into place. Nathan didn't come out right away. I didn't wait. I had nothing left to hear from him that the judge hadn't already made clear. By the time I reached my truck, my phone buzzed once. Unknown number. I stared at it for a second, then declined the call and blocked it without listening. That was the last time I heard from him directly. From that point on, anything I learned came secondhand. Apparently, he tried to appeal. Filed the paperwork himself. No new evidence. No legal argument strong enough to reopen anything. Denied. Quickly. Word spread, the way it always does. Quietly at first. Then, with more certainty, friends started pulling away from him. Not all at once. Not dramatically, but in small telling ways. Invitations that stopped coming. Group chats that went silent when he entered. People who had once laughed at his jokes, now recognizing that those same jokes had been something else entirely. Brittany told me later that the shift happened the moment they saw how he behaved after I left. Anyone can say something stupid once, she said, but the way he handled everything after, that's who he actually is. Melissa stopped speaking to him completely. Daniel did the same. Even Evan, who rarely took strong positions about anything, told me quietly over coffee one afternoon, I don't respect people who treat others like disposable furniture and then act shocked when they get removed from the room. That line stayed with me, because it was simple, accurate, and completely free of emotion. Nathan moved in with his mother after the divorce. That part didn't surprise me. What did surprise me was hearing that he had taken a full-time job at a restaurant not far from where we used to go for brunch. First full-time job he'd held in years. Apparently, he told people I had taken everything from him, that I had used the system to leave him with nothing, that I had rewritten the narrative. I didn't respond, didn't correct, didn't defend, because the truth has a way of settling into places where lies can't hold shape for long. And more importantly, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. About a month after everything finalized, I moved back into my house. Fully. Not as someone passing through. Not as someone reclaiming space. As the person who had always owned it. The first night back was quiet. Different from the apartment quiet. Deeper. Heavier in some ways. Because this space had history. But it also had something else now. Absence. Not the painful kind. The clean kind. The kind that makes room for something new instead of reminding you what used to be there. Nathan had cleared out his things. Mostly. A few small things remained. A coffee mug at the back of a cabinet. A shirt tucked into the corner of a closet. Nothing significant. Nothing worth keeping. I boxed them without thinking about it. Left them in the garage. Didn't call. Didn't message. If he wanted them, he could arrange it through official channels. Otherwise, they would eventually become just objects with no attachment. Then I started changing things. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just deliberately. I repainted the living room. Not the soft gray Nathan had chosen. Something warmer. Something I chose. I replaced the throw pillows, the framed prints, the small decorative things that had never really felt like mine. I rearranged furniture, open space, removed anything that carried the subtle imprint of someone else's preferences layered over mine. It wasn't about erasing him. It was about removing what didn't belong to me in the first place. Work changed too. Or maybe I did. My boss pulled me aside about 2 months after the divorce finalized. You've been different lately, he said. I raised an eyebrow. That good or bad? Good, he said immediately. More focused, more decisive. You're solving problems faster, handling pressure better. Whatever changed, keep it. I almost laughed, because the answer was simple. I removed the one thing in my life that consistently told me I wasn't enough. Turns out that frees up a surprising amount of energy. I got promoted not long after that. Senior engineer to lead. More responsibility. More oversight. More decisions. It felt right. Not overwhelming. Not intimidating. Just aligned. 6 months later, I started dating again. Slowly. Carefully. Not because I was afraid of being hurt. Because I had learned what it looked like when something started going wrong, and I wasn't interested in ignoring it again. I met Daniel Carter at a bookstore. Not one of those dramatic, cinematic meetings people like to exaggerate. Just two people reaching for the same book at the same time. Hands brushing. A small awkward apology. Then conversation. He asked what I liked to read. I asked the same. We stood there for nearly an hour talking about books, movies, work, the small, ordinary details that tell you more about someone than any rehearsed story ever could. He listened. That was the first thing I noticed. Not performative listening, not waiting for his turn to speak. Actual listening. When I spoke, he stayed with the conversation. Didn't redirect it. Didn't diminish it. Didn't turn it into something about himself. That shouldn't have felt rare. But after everything it did, we started seeing each other, casually at first, then more regularly. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. Just easy. One night a few months in, he asked about my past. Everyone does eventually. I didn't give him the full story, just the outline. My ex-husband used to make jokes about me in public, I said. Eventually, I realized they weren't jokes. Daniel nodded slowly. That sounds exhausting. It was. What made you leave? I thought about it for a second, then answered honestly. He called me broken in front of our friends. Daniel's expression didn't shift into shock or outrage. Just understanding. That'll do it, he said quietly. Yeah, I said, it did. He didn't ask for more. Didn't push. Didn't try to analyze it. He just accepted it. And that was enough. A few weeks later, we ended up at the same Italian restaurant, the one where everything had ended. Neither of us planned it. He picked it from a list of places nearby. I realized where we were only after we walked in. For a moment, I considered suggesting somewhere else. Then I didn't. We sat at a different table. Better lighting. Better view. Daniel was telling me a story about his sister's new baby, showing me pictures on his phone. The waitress came, took our order, brought bread. Normal. Simple. Uncomplicated. Halfway through the meal, Daniel paused. Everything okay? He asked. You seem a little distracted. I looked around the restaurant. Same walls, same lighting, same low hum of conversation, different life. This is where my marriage ended, I said. He blinked, then looked around, not dramatically, just taking it in. We can leave, he said. I shook my head. Food's too good. He smiled. Fair point. We stayed, ate, talked, shared dessert, argued lightly over the check. He lost. We walked out together. Same door, same parking lot, same night air. But everything else was different. The last time I left that place, I walked out alone with a life collapsing behind me. This time, I walked out beside someone who treated me like I was worth listening to. No weight on my shoulders. No voice in my head translating insults into excuses. Just quiet. Clear. Mine. 2 days later, I got one final message from an unknown number. I almost blocked it without reading. Almost. But curiosity is a persistent thing. So I opened it. It was Nathan, using someone else's phone. I know you probably won't answer. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For real this time. I know I messed everything up. I'm not asking for anything. Just, I'm sorry. I read it once, then again. And for the first time since everything ended, I felt something close to closure. Not because of what he said, because of what I didn't feel. No pull. No urge to respond. No need to explain. No desire to reopen anything. Just distance. Clean. Complete. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and went back to my evening. That's the part no one talks about. Not the courtroom. Not the dramatic exit. Not the moment everything breaks, but the quiet after. The part where you realize you're no longer carrying something you got used to carrying, and how light everything feels when you finally put it down.